The first is Malia Rose Helfmeyer. The title of her project is The Slot, the Hinge, and the High Rise, the Politics of Space and the Rhetoric of Urban Development in San Francisco's South of Market area. Malia Rose Helfmeyer grew up in the land of the peaches and pines in Athens, Georgia. She moved out west to pursue a bachelor's in arts in sociology and anthropology from Lewis and Clark College. She has remained a faithful West Coast transplant ever since, and such enjoys experiencing the local histories of her new home in the San Francisco Bay Area. Her thesis in visual and critical studies is an extension of her interest in local history. It explores the politics of space in the current and projected landscape of San Francisco's South of Market area, and places this in context of the neighborhood's tumultuous past. Malia is especially inspired by the educational potential of the arts and its affiliated institutions. She's also the Education and Public Programs Assistant at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art.
Let me begin by stating that space is a process. Space surrounds us, but not as a container that we fill with our bodies and our buildings. Rather, space, here the urban space of San Francisco, is made up of the relationships between our bodies, the buildings, our culture, and the landscape. Social, visual, economic, and political systems work on and in the city, forming, reforming, and transforming it. Yet when we are outside on the streets, we cannot necessarily see these systems in action. So how can we locate these space-making processes? Paying attention to the discourse of space is one way to track them. In the field of cultural studies, discourse is defined as the representations, social practices, language, and codes that constitute a specific topic or subject. And the knowledge created by a discourse constitutes a kind of power that is exercised over what is known. In the words of sociologist Stuart Hall, those who produce the discourse have the power to make it true. Today, I will direct your attention to the discourse of urban development in San Francisco and its effects on the space of a particular neighborhood, the South of Market area, or the SoMa. This story begins 60 years ago, when a discursive campaign helped to create slums south of Market in order to justify clearing those slums and redeveloping a working-class, light industrial neighborhood into a corporate convention and entertainment campus. And the story continues to the present and extends to the future of another part of the SoMa, where a discourse of urban revitalization and redevelopment is again endangering a low-income neighborhood. Here, we are looking at a recent portrait of the 6th Street corridor south of Market. This is one of San Francisco's lowest socioeconomic neighborhoods, where a number of low-rent residences and single-room occupancy hotels are located. This area is known for having a dense, homeless, and transient population, as well as social service outposts that work to meet the needs of these citizens. A large development complex has been proposed on acreage that forms a border with 6th Street. The development is called the 5M Project, a name that reflects its future location at the corner of 5th Street and Mission Street, 5 and M. 5M is described as a revitalizing solution to the impoverished conditions of this neighborhood. However, a look at the SoMa's past and the role of a similar discourse in assisting unjust transformations to the area leads to a sense of wariness when urban development is promoted through promises of revitalization. This newspaper photo from 1953 of a bustling street south of Market was accompanied by a caption that stated, "Cleanup due? Here's a part of Skid Road." The imposed language reframes this scene of everyday life in the city. By harnessing the authority of health experts, mentioning sanitation law violations, and classifying the space as run down, the discourse prods viewers to look for signs of dirtiness, or to equate what is seen here with the conditions of a slum. Urban space includes the people who inhabit it, and the discursive campaign that reshaped public perceptions of the Soma was also directed at the area's residents. In this photograph from 1956, we see a group of middle-aged men dressed in sport coats, hats, tucked-in shirts, and close shaves. They are passing a bottle around, and one of the men is taking his turn, a muscle visible in his skinny neck as he drinks, while his companions seem to be cheering him on. Consider this caption: "Retired union men enjoy an afternoon drink outside their homes south of Market." Perhaps you think, oh, these men are relishing their retirement. They worked hard for most of their lives on the railroads or the shipyards or the iron foundries nearby, and now they are enjoying a sunny day in the neighborhood. I made this caption up based on what I know about the industrial history of the area and the concentration of retired union worker housing south of Market. Here is the actual caption from 1956, "Alcoholics on Skid Road." This description affects our perceptions of the space. Instead of seeing a singular afternoon drink, we are told to see a chronic problem, alcoholism. And instead of an everyday street scene, we are told that this is Skid Road, a blighted space where troubled individuals loiter. This photograph, the newspaper photo in its caption, and other text and image combinations were part of the discursive campaign launched by the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency, a pseudo-governmental group that was a major force behind the transformations of the Soma during the mid-20th century, funded in part by the deep pockets of powerful individuals who would benefit from the area's metamorphosis into a corporate conventioneer's landscape. Pictured here is the hotel mogul Ben Swig, especially influential in the early phases of the redevelopment plan, and whose hotels would profit immensely from the business travelers coming to San Francisco for conventions and in need of a nearby place to stay. Looking at what is now called the Yerba Buena district, where the Moscone Convention Center now stands, the area's past and the processes that transformed this space are invisible. Even during the transformations, the role of discourse on the space was not obvious, but there were real consequences to the discourse of Skid Road. Over 4,000 people lost their homes and their communities in the name of economic and social progress. By describing the space as a slum, over time, it was made true. Those who produce the discourse have the power to make it true. The 5M project is a joint real estate venture between the global media conglomerate the Hearst Corporation, which owns the property at 5th and Mission, and an international urban development firm named Forest City Enterprises. Both of these companies will benefit financially from the new development. 5 new buildings will be erected, creating 1 million square feet of new office space intended for San Francisco's thriving technology economy, along with 750 high-end residential units, not low-income housing. Over 5,000 people will flood the area once construction is complete. And like a large stone dropped into a pool of water, 5M will undoubtedly have a ripple effect on the area and will more likely displace than improve the conditions for the current communities of 6th Street. The 5M project has not begun physical construction yet, but its discursive campaign has been launched. The language for the project has been written, and the planning and promotional materials are circulating. And 5M's discourse produces a perception of the neighborhood that serves the developers. In a San Francisco Chronicle article about 5M, the publisher touts the new development as a real opportunity for the city to see some growth, for this property to be used in a much more dynamic way. And at the 5M website, using similar language, the developers promise to bring the area to life, claiming that there is a lack of cultural activity and cohesiveness that an area like this needs to thrive. 5M will harness the site's potential, transforming an underutilized property into a vibrant place for community and innovation. These descriptions imply that the area is currently useless and lifeless. Much like the redevelopment discourse of a previous era, 5M's discourse dehumanizes a low-income community. It diagnoses the space as having problems that are curable through redevelopment, which disavows the relationship between urban development and urban poverty. While discursive strategies can and have been used to promote uneven development in the city, alternative discourses of the city have resisted these transformations. And at the 5M development site, a public art installation by the local artist Ana Teresa Fernandez offers an alternative discourse of the neighborhood. The piece is titled The 5 W's and is a series of 5 interactive sculptures mounted on an exterior wall of the San Francisco Chronicle building at 5th and Mission Street. The sculptures are chalkboards, accompanied by a rainbow assortment of chalk that entices spectators to become participants, to leave their mark and assert their presence in this space. Each of the chalkboards is in the shape of a word, plus an additional square for overflow. Each word begins with the letter W. Who, what, when, where, and why. By offering prompts for the foundations of storytelling, the 5 guiding questions of journalism and of historical critique, the 5 W's encourage a critical reading of the development site. Their dynamic surfaces boast a local vigor that the development discourse denies. The kaleidoscopic layers of tags, images, words, and gestures that appear on the 5 W's daily offer an energetic portrait in chalk of the presence, character, and attitude of the neighborhood. The chalkboards demonstrate that discourse participates in consequential ways in the space of the city. The sculptures are words, and those words are attached to a building, modifying its surface, literally reforming the texture of the city through text, through language, and through art. Mounted within the terrain of the future development site, the 5 W's provide an opportunity for viewers to see connections between a dehumanizing discourse and an impoverished material reality. They reveal the exclusions that oil the mechanisms of redevelopment. One afternoon in January, I watched a man spend half an hour writing, erasing, and rewriting on the Y chalkboard. A sense of frustration and devalorization are legible in his words and in the visible traces of his gestures on the board. Oops. I'm an out-of-work, hard-working man and a vet to boot, his message explained. U.S. Army and proud and know my trade. Some of his words were partially wiped away, though still legible. Let's put us back on the map, it read, with an arrow pointing to another statement in the corner. Not on the street like a dog. I left the site that day while he was still writing. When I returned the next morning, the board was filled with more of his text underneath a layer of street slang. I was a good man, his all-caps script demanded. Honesty no longer pays. It used to mean something. His words surface the injustice experienced at the individual level and wrought by global systems that value a certain kind of work and a certain kind of person. His call for acknowledgement, I was a good man, stabs at the cracks in the capitalist paradigm's promise of a social benefit to all through economic progress. His letters spell out an experience of being devalued. Honesty no longer pays. By a system and a country that he fought for, that he once worked for, but which has deemed his work and his self-sacrifice for a national good no longer useful. Now he identifies as homeless, lives a life that is less than human, like a dog on the street. The man's words are to a degree overshadowed by the street slang on the chalkboard, which has a dominant presence on all the 5 W's and works as a potent metaphor for the neighborhood's situation. Like the language that distracts the eye from more poignant claims, the immediacy of the neighborhood's impoverished conditions mask the underlying fact that these are symptoms of systemic injustice rather than individual failures. The aggressive language on the artwork also points to the subjectivity of value judgments. While these words may be offensive to some, to others they are a part of a daily lexicon or an expression of empowerment. Our perceptions and values are always affected by the position we hold and the systems that have taught us to see. The 5 Ws call attention to the subjectivity and diversity of perspectives in a city. The chalkboards cannot be understood from one vantage point. They are available to multiple hands, multiple colors, and multiple voices. Heterogeneity is a quintessential aspect of urban space. Difference, confrontation, and debate are always inscribed on the space of the city, and the 5 Ws opens a window onto these processes and acts as a marquee for advocating their value. 5M, under the guise of improving the conditions of the neighborhood, will reduce the range of difference here. Yet I have not mentioned one aspect of the relationship between the 5 Ws and the 5M project that troubles any binary or oppositional dynamic I set up between the two. Fernandez was commissioned by 5M. Not by the Hearst Corporation or Forest City directly, but by the nonprofit arts-based organization, Intersection for the Arts, which has partnered with 5M in exchange for new headquarters in the development. Knowing Fernandez's funding source does not completely discount the resistant spirit of her piece. The 5 Ws are an example of institutional critique, of challenging a discourse or system from within, of occupying a gray area between compliance and confrontation. Despite her complicity with the forces of development on an economic level, at the level of culture, Fernandez's work is defiant. Many of its characteristics render the 5 Ws useless to the forces of development: impermanence, distributed agency and displaced authorship, an everyday aesthetic, as well as the messages that reveal connections and contradictions between promises of progress and the reality of impoverishment. The 5 Ws occupy a gray area and highlight the city as a gray area. Urban space is a process. It is a discussion. It is not an equation with one solution. Like the multi-hued and palimpsestic surfaces of the chalkboards, the city is a diversely layered and cacophonous space. And Fernandez's work represents the in-between spaces that art can occupy as it simultaneously enables and contests systems of power. The gray areas are the sites of new possibilities. They are the cracks in the pavement where other processes, other spaces, other who's, what's, when's, where's, and why's can be imagined and made visible. Thank you.